In a week marked by startling revelations and significant policy shifts, the Trump administration finds itself at the nexus of high-stakes geopolitics, transformative domestic reforms, and an unexpected pivot in the digital finance world. Central to the unfolding narrative are President Donald Trump's audacious foreign policy pronouncements, the sweeping changes impacting federal agencies in healthcare, and the surprising strategic shift of his social media enterprise Trump Media and Technology Group into the cryptocurrency realm. Most notably, an audio recording obtained by CNN and detailed in a new book on last year's presidential race 2024 reveals that President Trump allegedly told donors last year he threatened to bomb Moscow and Beijing to deter potential invasions of Ukraine and Taiwan, respectively. According to the audio, Trump recounted a conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin regarding Ukraine, stating, "You go into Ukraine, and I bomb the S out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice." He further claimed Putin's retort of "no way" was met with his firm way. An almost identical conversation was reportedly held with Chinese President Xi Jinping concerning Taiwan. While NBC News has not independently verified the recording or the CNN report, the revelation underscores a highly assertive and unconventional approach to international deterrence, potentially impacting global stability and diplomatic relations. This aggressive rhetoric comes amidst other critical foreign policy developments. The Trump administration is preparing to resume weapons shipments to Ukraine, a reversal of a previous pause on some air defense and precision-guided weapons. President Trump indicated his approval for sending defensive weapons to Ukraine, remarking on Putin's actions, "He's killing too many people." Concurrently, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the Pentagon to discuss a potential ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza and recent military strikes on Iranian nuclear enrichment sites. These high-level discussions highlight the complex and often fluid nature of the administration's engagement on multiple international fronts. Domestically, the president also teased an announcement of new trade actions affecting at least 7 countries following letters sent this week outlining tariffs they will face if trade agreements are not reached by August 1, signaling a continued emphasis on his America First trade agenda. On the home front, the Supreme Court yesterday delivered a temporary victory to the administration, allowing President Trump to move ahead with plans to slash various federal agencies and impose reductions in force. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, in a written dissent, sharply criticized the decision as hubristic and senseless, raising concerns about the potential impact on government functionality and civil service. This move is part of a broader domestic policy bill that includes sweeping cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. Rural hospitals across the U.S. are already bracing for severe consequences, with some like Hutchinson Regional Healthcare System in south-central Kansas forced to consider painful choices such as cutting services for children or cancer patients, according to CEO Benjamin Anderson. These policy changes could profoundly reshape the landscape of federal governance and healthcare access nationwide. Adding another layer to the week's news, President Trump's social media company Trump Media and Technology Group (TMTG), the parent of Truth Social, is undergoing a significant metamorphosis, pivoting aggressively into the cryptocurrency industry. This strategic shift comes as Truth Social struggles to generate substantial revenue. Having incurred a $31 million net loss in the first quarter of the year and yet to post a profit since going public in March 2024. Shares of Trump Media are down 43% this year, highlighting the company's financial challenges. The platform's user base and advertising revenue have been limited, with roughly 80% of its website traffic last month driven by viewing President Trump's own comments, according to SimilarWeb. In response to these financial pressures, TMTG has rapidly moved into crypto, raising $2.5 billion in cash to invest in Bitcoin and working to bring crypto-related exchange-traded funds ETFs to market. This includes plans for a Truth Social Bitcoin ETF, a Truth Social Bitcoin Ethereum ETF, and a Truth Social Crypto Blue Chip ETF slated to trade on the New York Stock Exchange, while Trump Media is merely licensing its name for these securities, with a disclaimer that it takes no position on the advisability of investing. The move is a clear attempt to leverage the Trump brand in a new financial frontier.
Brian Armour, director of ETF research with Morningstar, noted, "My guess is they look to compete based on the Trump name. There's not much to distinguish them."
This foray into crypto also raises questions about potential conflicts of interest given President Trump's strong public support for digital assets and his administration's light-touch regulatory approach to the sector. Crypto companies have been significant donors to his inaugural committee, and the SEC has notably closed or dismissed about a dozen matters involving crypto companies since he took office, including Crypto.com, a partner in TMTG's ETF Ventures. Hillary Allen, a law professor specializing in crypto assets, voiced a common concern: the concern you come back to with all Trump products are whether they are being used as a way to curry favor with the administration. Despite a White House spokeswoman asserting no conflicts of interest due to Trump's assets being in a trust managed by his son Donald Trump Jr., the intertwining of political influence and financial gain remains a focal point of scrutiny. While some investors like part-time pastor Chad Nedahan express personal reservations about crypto but acknowledge the company's need for profitability, others like day trader Greg Bowden are more pragmatic, stating, "Trump's in it for the money." As the administration navigates a complex tapestry of international tensions, domestic policy overhauls, and a bold venture into the digital economy, the coming months will reveal the true impact of these aggressive strategies. The effectiveness of Trump's diplomatic strong-arming. The long-term consequences of federal agency restructuring and healthcare cuts, and the success of Truth Social's high-stakes gamble on cryptocurrency will undoubtedly shape the political and economic landscape, leaving observers to ponder the evolving nature of power and profit in the modern era. The global economic and political landscape is currently navigating a period of intense volatility and uncertainty, driven by a series of significant policy decisions and pronouncements from the current U.S. administration. From an aggressive stance on international trade to complex domestic fiscal reforms and even the handling of high-profile legal controversies, the ripple effects are being felt across markets, industries, and public sentiment worldwide. At the forefront of these developments is President Trump's escalating trade policy, marked by his firm declaration that there will be no extension to the August 1 deadline for new tariffs. This commitment has sent shivers through global markets, particularly after the president promised to unleash a new wave of tariff letters targeting at least 7 countries, with more expected. The administration has explicitly stated its intention to impose a substantial 50% tariff on copper imports, matching existing duties on aluminum and steel, and has even suggested duties as high as 200% on pharmaceuticals. This aggressive approach is already impacting commodity markets, with COMEX copper futures falling over 3% as traders reacted to the threat, and New York futures for the metal rising 25% above other global prices, indicating a significant disconnect and increased costs for U.S. factories. Input costs for American manufacturers have surged, reaching unprecedented premiums compared to international benchmarks. This has prompted warnings from industry players like Southwire Company LLC, a top U.S. copper importer, who noted that such restrictions would merely redirect supply to China while causing significant shortages for U.S. producers. Beyond specific commodities, the broader tariff environment has already seen U.S. ocean imports from China tumble 28.3% in June year-over-year, and has impacted consumer behavior, with some Amazon sellers reportedly curbing Prime Day discounts due to price worries, and a poll indicating U.S. consumers plan to cut back spending amid tariff concerns. The cascading effects are evident in corporate earnings, with German carmaker Mercedes-Benz reporting a 9% fall in Q2 unit sales, partly due to tariffs, and South African citrus farmers facing souring fortunes. The administration's strategy, described as a topsy-turvy twist in trade policy, involves issuing letters outlining new tariff rates, a tactic that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent reportedly championed to buy more time for negotiations and extract last-minute concessions. While an initial July 9 deadline was pushed to August 1, the message remains clear: no extensions will be granted. This has intensified diplomatic efforts globally. The European Union, for instance, is racing to clinch a deal signaling a willingness to accept a 10% universal tariff on many exports but seeking exemptions for key sectors like aircraft and spirits, even as China has warned against restarting trade tensions and threatened retaliation against countries that exclude it from supply chains. Canada has scrapped its digital services tax to facilitate trade talks, while Vietnam has agreed to a 20% tariff, lower than initially threatened, though higher duties loom for transshipped goods.
India has presented its best offer for a trade deal, including sourcing 10% of its cooking gas imports from the US by 2026. As Southeast Asian economies including Thailand, Malaysia and Bangladesh press for more talks to avert steep levies.
Japan and South Korea have also received letters outlining 25% tariffs, prompting them to accelerate negotiations. Beyond these bilateral discussions, President Trump has also threatened a 10% additional tariff on imports from BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, accusing them of anti-American policies, a direct response to their joint statement condemning unilateral tariffs and urging consistency with WTO rules. This complex web of negotiations and threats has led the United Nations Trade Agency to warn that the prolonged uncertainty is causing instability for countries worldwide.
Domestically, the administration is also making headlines with its Big Beautiful Bill, a new spending law that has generated debate regarding its impact on Social Security benefits. While the Social Security Administration (SSA) initially touted the legislation as eliminating federal income taxes on benefits for most beneficiaries, a closer look reveals a more nuanced reality. The bill does not entirely remove taxes on Social Security, rather it introduces a temporary bonus tax deduction of up to $6,000 for seniors aged 65 and older, applicable to all of a senior's income, not just Social Security benefits. This deduction, which expires at the end of 2028, is available to individuals with adjusted gross incomes of $75,000 or less, $150,000 for couples filing jointly, phasing out for higher earners. Policy experts including Garrett Watson of the Tax Foundation and Bobby Kogan of the Center for American Progress have characterized the SSA's claim as misleading, clarifying that the measure provides relief through a deduction rather than a full repeal, which was constrained by congressional rules. Notably, low-income seniors who already pay no federal income tax will not benefit, and the biggest beneficiaries are by definition higher-income seniors. Critics argue that this temporary deduction could exacerbate Social Security's fragile financial state, which is projected to deplete its trust fund by 2034 without congressional action. The Penn-Wharton budget model estimates that a full elimination of Social Security income taxes would reduce federal revenue by $1.5 trillion over a decade and increase federal debt by 7% by 2054, underscoring the fiscal challenges ahead. Meanwhile, the administration faces a different kind of challenge on the public trust front, exemplified by the ongoing controversy surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein files. After President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi had previously hinted at exposing hidden truths about Epstein's death, they are now telling supporters to move on following the Justice Department's decision to close the case, concluding that no further disclosure would be appropriate or warranted. Bondi explicitly stated he committed suicide. This stance has ignited significant backlash from a small but influential segment of the president's far-right political coalition, including figures like Laura Loomer, Elon Musk, Stephen K. Bannon and Tucker Carlson, who had expected more revelations and are now accusing the administration of a cover-up. FBI agents and national security prosecutors were reportedly diverted to examine case files and video, with Bondi clarifying that the unreleased video content contained child porn downloaded by that disgusting Jeffrey Epstein, which would never going to see the light of day. This rare public criticism from normally loyal right-wing media underscores the complexities of navigating public expectations and conspiracy theories, especially for officials like Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino, who previously criticized federal agencies but now finds himself defending their actions. The administration is visibly eager to put the matter behind them, but the outrage highlights the challenges federal agencies face in managing information and maintaining public confidence in an era of heightened scrutiny.
As the August 1st tariff deadline rapidly approaches, the world watches to see which trade deals will materialize and which countries will face the full brunt of the new U.S. duties. The Big Beautiful Bill will continue to be scrutinized for its long-term impact on Social Security's solvency and the financial well-being of American seniors. Simultaneously, the administration's ability to manage public trust, particularly concerning sensitive and high-profile investigations, will remain a critical test. These intertwined economic, fiscal, and political narratives suggest a future defined by continued policy shifts, market adjustments, and an evolving public discourse on accountability and governance. In a week marked by a flurry of high-stakes decisions and pronouncements, President Donald Trump has dominated headlines, steering the discourse across a broad spectrum of U.S. policy, from aggressive trade maneuvers to intricate foreign diplomacy and even an obscure domestic legislative detail. The administration's actions on Wednesday, July 9, 2025 underscored a multifaceted approach to governance, leaving observers to parse the immediate impacts and anticipate future shifts. At the forefront of the president's agenda were significant trade announcements following his staunch defense of tariffs on Truth Social. Earlier in the day, President Trump indicated that a minimum of 7 countries would be named in relation to trade matters, with additional nations to follow in the afternoon. This declaration came shortly after he asserted that tariffs have had zero impact on inflation and reiterated his call for Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell to cut interest rates, a recurring theme in his economic commentary. The president's trade rhetoric has intensified, with previous reports from Callum Jones indicating threats of tariffs soaring as high as 200% on foreign drugs and 50% on copper. This aggressive stance is further complicated by a perceived fluidity in deadlines. A recent statement suggesting a latest tariff deadline was not 100% firm was swiftly contradicted by a firm declaration that no extensions will be granted beyond August 1st. This shifting landscape creates considerable uncertainty for global markets and supply chains as businesses struggle to adapt to rapidly evolving trade conditions and the potential for significant cost increases on imported goods. While the president maintains tariffs have no inflationary effect, economic analysts often point to the potential for increased consumer prices and reduced competitiveness for U.S. companies reliant on imported components. Beyond the economic sphere, foreign policy emerged as a central pillar of the president's week. Diplomatic efforts were highlighted by the hosting of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House, with discussions primarily focused on achieving a ceasefire in Gaza. This crucial meeting underscores the administration's active role in Middle East peacemaking efforts. Concurrently, the White House confirmed the resumption of military aid shipments to Ukraine following a temporary halt. This move signals a renewed commitment to supporting Kyiv amidst ongoing geopolitical tensions. In a separate but equally significant engagement, President Trump also welcomed a contingent of African leaders to the White House, with the primary objective being the exploration of new commercial opportunities. These multifaceted diplomatic initiatives reflect a busy international agenda, aiming to project U.S. influence and secure strategic interests across various regions. Domestically, a lesser-known but impactful element of the president's week involved an obscure provision within a major agenda bill that has drawn the ire of the gambling community. While specific details of this provision remain unconfirmed due to reporting limitations, its emergence suggests the broad scope of the administration's legislative efforts, affecting even niche sectors. As the week progresses, the full implications of these policy decisions will undoubtedly unfold. The promised trade announcements will be closely scrutinized for their specific targets and potential economic ripple effects, while the outcomes of the diplomatic engagements will shape international relations. The dynamic interplay between these domestic and foreign policy initiatives paints a picture of an administration deeply engaged across multiple fronts, with each decision carrying the potential for far-reaching consequences in a complex global landscape. Less than 6 months into his second term, President Donald Trump has fully seized the reins of the U.S. economy, embarking on a bold and potentially volatile economic experiment long previewed during his 2024 campaign. With expensive tax cuts now lost, steep global tariffs taking clearer shape, and twin campaigns to deregulate government and deport immigrants well underway, the future of the nation's finances and its centuries-old trading relationships now rests squarely in his hands. This aggressive push, enacted despite dire warnings from many economists, sets the stage for a period of both triumph and turbulence, the accountability for which will undeniably belong to the White House. The economic landscape, while showing early signs of strain, has so far demonstrated a degree of resilience. Last month, the United States saw a beat in job expectations, adding 147,000 positions. However, the underlying sources of this growth appear to be narrowing, evidenced by a continued slump in manufacturing jobs and lackluster hiring across retail and professional services. The unemployment rate dipped to 4.1%, yet the ranks of the long-term unemployed grew. While inflation remained relatively muted through May, consumer spending, a crucial engine of U.S. economic growth, has begun to sputter as Americans pull back on purchases, possibly after months of stockpiling in anticipation of Mr. Trump's tariffs. Despite these mixed signals, David Kelly, chief global strategist for J.P. Morgan Asset Management, described the U.S. economy as a relatively healthy tortoise, projecting a modest 1% GDP growth by year-end 2025. But acknowledging a bit of a diversion in the road as new policies take effect. At the core of this agenda is a sprawling new domestic policy law signed last week, which primarily extends and expands components of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act (TCJA). The package provisions new tax reductions for businesses, seniors, and certain workers, with congressional analysts predicting lower tax bills for many Americans, particularly the wealthy. However, these cuts are financed by deep reductions to federal safety net programs, including Medicaid and SNAP, raising concerns that poorer Americans could be significantly worse off. The Penn-Wharton budget model estimates the reconciliation bill will increase primary deficits by $3.2 trillion over 10 years on a conventional basis, with the dynamic cost accounting for economic changes rising to $3.6 trillion. Their analysis projects a fall in GDP by 0.3% in 10 years and a substantial 4.6% in 30 years. With average wages decreasing by 0.4% and 3.4% respectively over the same periods. Maya McGuinness, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, warned that the legislation's cost would push the nation's debt-to-output ratio to post-World War II levels, dampening private investment and driving up borrowing costs for both government and average Americans, ultimately slowing economic growth. The administration, however, dismisses these warnings, having estimated the tax measure would generate enough revenue and economic activity to reduce deficits by as much as $11 trillion, a projection even conservative economists like Glenn Hubbard, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisers under President George W. Bush, deemed way out of line. Simultaneously, Mr. Trump has broadened his tariff offensive, threatening duties as high as 40% on an initial batch of 14 countries unless they strike favorable trade deals with the United States. On Monday, he began issuing these threats, declaring we're done negotiating, and by Tuesday he promised new duties on imported drugs, computer chips, and copper, with the big money expected to start flowing by August 1st. His top advisors anticipate collecting over $300 billion from tariffs by year-end. This renewed brinkmanship, following a 90-day pause announced in April, has economists sounding renewed alarms. The budget lab at Yale estimates these duties could cause households to lose on average $2,300 in income this year. The White House, however, contests these projections, with Stephen Miron, chairman of the White House Council of Economic Advisers, asserting on CNBC that there is no sustained pattern of a tariff-driven price pressure anywhere, citing a faster fall in imported goods prices than overall goods prices since February. Despite the administration's claims, the real-world impacts are already evident. COMEX copper futures fell over 3% on Wednesday following Trump's 50% tariff threat, which has already pushed costs for U.S. factories up, with New York futures trading 25% above other global prices. U.S. used car prices have surged, and U.S. ocean imports of containerized goods from China tumbled 28.3% in June, extending a steep decline that began in May. Globally, the tariff threats are causing significant disruption. China has warned against restarting trade tensions and threatened retaliation against nations that exclude it from supply chains. The European Union is racing to clinch a deal, signaling willingness to accept a 10% universal tariff but seeking sectoral exemptions. Canada has scrapped its digital services tax to facilitate talks. Southeast Asian economies are scrambling for negotiations while Japan's past efforts to woo Trump have seemingly backfired, leading to their prime minister calling the new 25% tariff extremely regrettable while remaining committed to negotiations. Industries from South African citrus farmers to German carmaker Mercedes-Benz are reporting negative impacts, with the latter seeing a 9% drop in Q2 sales. Small business confidence in the U.S. has slipped and consumers are planning to cut back spending this summer, largely due to tariff-related anxieties. The vast uncertainty, particularly surrounding trade policy, has largely frozen the Federal Reserve, which has left borrowing costs untouched for months, awaiting the fuller effects of Mr. Trump's policies. This inaction has provided the president with a convenient fall guy in Fed Chair Jerome H. Powell, whom Mr. Trump has branded Mr. Too Late for not lowering borrowing costs as demanded. As Mark Dowding, Chief Investment Officer for Fixed Income at RBC Blue Bay Asset Management, observed, "If you end up with things like tariffs pushing up inflation and pushing down growth in the short term, then it can almost suit you as president to blame bad economic data on an incompetent Fed chair." As the August 1st deadline for new tariffs looms with the president's firm declaration of no extensions, the coming months will serve as a critical gauge. The U.S. economy is now navigating a complex and uncertain path, with the full ramifications of these far-reaching policies yet to unfold. The world watches to see if President Trump's grand economic experiment will usher in a new era of prosperity as he envisions, or if the warnings of economists will materialize into a damaging storm for the nation and the global economy. The ever-accelerating pace of technological advancement is reshaping global defense strategies, as evidenced by a flurry of recent developments emanating from Washington and its allies. At the forefront of this transformation is the burgeoning emphasis on autonomous systems, particularly drones, which are proving to be game changers on contemporary battlefields, prompting a critical re-evaluation of procurement, deployment, and international partnerships. A significant policy move underscoring this shift is the Trump administration's recently issued executive order unleashing American drone dominance. While ostensibly focused on civilian applications, the directive carries profound implications for the Pentagon and military personnel. President Donald Trump explicitly stated in the order that the Department of Defense must be able to procure, integrate, and train using low-cost, high-performing drones manufactured in the United States. This comes at a pivotal moment, as despite substantial investments, all branches of the U.S. military grapple with formidable challenges in effectively adopting and deploying diverse and affordable drones for widespread operational use. National security experts largely view the executive order as a positive step, albeit one whose ultimate impact hinges on rigorous execution. Lauren Kahn, a senior research analyst at Georgetown University's Center for Security and Emerging Technology, described the EO as directionally sound, signaling a strategic interest in accelerating the adoption of commercial unmanned aerial systems and reducing barriers to their use. David Rothstedt, a venture investor and Air Force reservist, echoed this sentiment, calling it a positive and timely move that supports both national security and the U.S. innovation ecosystem, which sends a meaningful demand signal to American entrepreneurs. However, Rothstedt, a former acquisition official at the Defense Innovation Unit, cautioned against repeating past mistakes, citing the proliferation of Chinese-made DJI drones as an example where the U.S. inadvertently ceded a portion of the small UAV market due to slow domestic incubation and scaling. A notable provision within the EO directs the Department of Defense and military leadership to identify programs that could become more cost-efficient or lethal if replaced by drones, requiring a report to the President within 90 days. While Mark Canchin, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, suggested the DoD has already been undertaking such reviews, pointing to the Army's termination of its Apache attack helicopter replacement program or the increased funding for the Air Force's collaborative combat aircraft, Kahn offered a nuanced perspective. She warned that this provision risks becoming a mere box-tickling exercise if not taken seriously, but could genuinely help rebalance a force still overinvested in costly, vulnerable legacy systems. Khan highlighted lessons from recent conflicts, noting that low-cost UAS can impose asymmetric costs and scale far faster than exquisite platforms, making them strong candidates for replacing certain ISR strike or base defense assets. However, she stressed that replacement should not be for its own sake, advocating for a high-low mix where attritable drones complement, not supplant, more advanced capabilities. Despite the EO's title, Delivering Drones to Our Warfighters, Khan observed that a significant section focuses on airspace issues and training rather than the deeper structural challenges of acquiring, sustaining, and rapidly scaling UAS. She also noted the order's omission of unmanned surface and underwater vehicles and other autonomous systems beyond aerial drones. A welcome inclusion, however, is the push to allow all platforms on the Pentagon's Blue UAS list, a program identifying secure commercial drones for government use, to operate on military installations without requiring special policy exceptions. Both Khan and Rothstedt emphasized the critical need to expand this list more frequently to accelerate innovation. Beyond the EO, experts suggested further measures. Tom Adams, director of public safety at DroneShield, called for more formal legislation to address gaps related to public safety and critical infrastructure. Rothstedt urged improved access for companies to testing ranges, especially for drones built to withstand electromagnetic interference, a critical lesson learned from U.S. platforms deployed in Ukraine that failed due to inadequate battlefield resilience. Crucially, Rothstedt underscored the necessity of budget allocations to support the EO's ambitions, asserting ultimately, policy without procurement falls flat. These developments unfold against a backdrop of complex international dynamics. Reports from CNN on July 9, 2025 indicated that Hegseth, a key figure, had authorized a pause on weapon shipments to Ukraine without informing the White House. Such a unilateral decision, if confirmed, highlights potential internal friction within the administration regarding foreign policy and military aid, carrying significant implications for global alliances and the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe. Simultaneously, Reuters reported on July 8, 2025 that former President Trump had reiterated his stance that South Korea should bear more of its own defense costs. In response, Anadolu Ajansi reported on July 9, 2025 that South Korea confirmed its commitment to comply with existing terms of its defense cost-sharing deal with the U.S. These discussions underscore a broader re-evaluation of defense burden sharing within established alliances, a discourse that is intrinsically linked to how nations invest in and deploy advanced military technologies. The collective narrative paints a picture of a defense landscape in flux driven by technological imperatives and geopolitical realignments. The push for drone dominance, the internal policy debates over military aid, and the ongoing discussions about alliance financial commitments all converge to define the future of global security. As autonomous systems become increasingly integral to military capabilities, the effectiveness of their integration will depend not only on technological innovation but also on coherent policy, robust funding, and stable, strategically aligned international partnerships. The coming months will be crucial in determining how these interconnected threads weave together to shape the next era of warfare and international relations. In a striking display of the evolving landscape of global diplomacy, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu recently nominated President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. A public gesture that underscores a pervasive strategy among world leaders, direct, often effusive flattery aimed at the American head of state. This meticulously staged moment, captured by news cameras during a White House dinner on Monday, saw Netanyahu present a letter to a visibly pleased Trump, declaring the nomination well-deserved. While Trump himself has often expressed skepticism about receiving the prestigious award, calling the gesture very meaningful, this incident is merely the latest example in a pattern of international engagement that observers say has fundamentally reshaped how nations interact with Washington. Indeed, the playbook for managing the Trump administration appears to have coalesced around the principle of personal appeals. Other prominent figures have adopted similar tactics, moving from past criticisms to lavish praise. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney, who once labeled Trump a bully last month, lauded your personal leadership of the United States.
Similarly,
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte privately texted Trump hailing your decisive action in Iran that was truly extraordinary, a message the president promptly made public. Perhaps most tellingly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who endured a notoriously angry Oval Office shouting match in February, has visibly altered his approach. A subsequent meeting at the Vatican in April proceeded smoothly, devoid of conflict, and notably Trump agreed on Monday to resume certain weapons shipments to Ukraine that had been halted just a week prior, a reversal amid improved relations and a disappointing phone call with Mr. Putin. This shift, according to experts, marks a significant departure from traditional diplomatic norms. Sam Edwards, an associate professor of modern political history at Loughborough University in Britain, observes that while diplomacy was once perceived as a broad institutional endeavor, it has now become highly personalized.
In this instance, they're playing the man, Edwards stated.
Adding, this is how it works. You come with gifts, you offer homage of sorts in order to gain the respect, the support, the favor of the head of that court. This transactional, almost feudal dynamic prioritizes individual rapport over established protocols, reflecting a leader whose decision-making is often seen as highly dependent on personal sentiment and perceived loyalty. Yet the efficacy of this flattery game remains a subject of debate among political analysts and seasoned diplomats. While public declarations of admiration might secure short-term gains or prevent immediate fallout, their long-term impact on policy and international stability is less certain. For instance, despite Netanyahu's assertion that Trump is forging peace as we speak in one country and one region after the other, the war in Gaza continues to rage even as ceasefire talks resume.
Similarly, the conflict in Ukraine persists,
defying Trump's past promises of a swift resolution. Even British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who reportedly sealed a deal with Trump in part by delivering a royal invitation, still sees some tariffs remain on British exports to America. Yolanda Spies, a former South African diplomat and director of the Oxford University Diplomatic Studies program, notes that while flattery has always been an element of diplomacy, its contemporary manifestation is distinct.
Traditionally, the most personal interactions between leaders used to happen privately, not in front of cameras. Now, with a leader like Trump, anything you send to him will be public. It means a new step in the flattery game. This public spectacle adds a layer of complexity, forcing leaders to weigh the potential domestic and international perception of their overt displays of deference. Zelensky's transformation in his dealings with Trump, for example, serves as a stark lesson,
with Spies noting that he now prefaces every statement with how grateful he is to America.
The Nobel Peace Prize nomination itself is fraught with nuance.
Netanyahu's gesture is not unique. Pakistan's government formally nominated Trump in June, citing his decisive diplomatic intervention during an outbreak of violence between India and Pakistan. Trump has frequently voiced his frustration at not having received the prize, even posting on social media that he believes he won't get a Nobel Peace Prize no matter what I do. The optics of a nomination from Netanyahu, who faces accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza from the International Criminal Court, add a layer of controversy, prompting reactions like that of anti-war activist Medea Benjamin, who tweeted, "I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Surreal." This era of highly personalized public-facing diplomacy, driven by the unique personality of the American president, raises fundamental questions about the future of international relations. While it has demonstrably influenced immediate interactions and some policy decisions, its long-term implications for global governance, institutional integrity, and the pursuit of complex geopolitical objectives are still unfolding. Whether this transactional approach will become a lasting fixture or merely a temporary aberration remains to be seen, but for now it dictates the rhythm of engagement with the world's most powerful nation.